Classroom Serial presents The Fire Starter, written by Chris Slavin, a first chapter Friday read aloud video with the Word Nerd. Classroom Serial is a series of short stories created to help teachers and students work on reading comprehension, grammar, and fluency, all while having a little fun. This story is a sample of all the goodness you'll find with Chris Slavin and Classroom Serial. One summer night, four friends meet at their secret hideout nestled in the woods surrounding their town's abandoned amusement park. But unfortunately, things don't quite work out the way they planned. Ready to read this story? Let's dive in and read The Fire Starter by Chris Slavin. The Fire Starter, Chapter 1, Part 1 of 5, Chase Through the Trees. Richie was by himself when he snuck into the woods. This late in the summer, he didn't even have to think about the directions Lauren had given him back in June. Go to the chain link fence, find the big white sign with red letters. It says Presto's Playland and Wildlife Adventures. No trespassing. The fence is loose at the bottom a few yards to the left. Just yank it up and shimmy through. This had to be Richie's 10th time into the woods, but he still felt a nervous rush every time he pried up the stabby bottom of the fence and held it just barely high enough to slide under. Presto's Playland was long gone, but Wildlife Adventure was still alive and well, saved by a private investor when the amusement park went under. It was a massive expanse of land separated safely from the woods and filled with wild animals. Every weekend, kid-packed cars flooded in to see the elephants, lions, and giraffes. But Richie and his new group of friends encountered the wildlife in a different way, from their secret spot deep in the woods. To get there, you needed the only remaining artifact of Presto's Playland, an old wooden roller coaster, its arch peak visible just over the tree line. Walk straight at the roller coaster for about 5 minutes, Lauren had said. You'll run into the spot. Richie felt someone behind him. He whipped around. Lauren? Nothing. No one. Richie froze for an extra second, staring into the trees, the light from the setting sun shimmering their branches. He turned to resume his trek, but the instant he took a step, he heard behind him the unmistakable sound of a body in motion. Richie took off at a sprint. As he ran, he heard the body in close pursuit, crunching leaves and snapping branches. Finally, after what felt like miles, he stumbled through the entrance to the spot. He was relieved to finally see Lauren, Fritz, and Daffodil. Except if everyone was here, who was chasing him? Part 2 of 5, Worst Night Ever. Finally, Lauren said, taking Richie's arm. Come on, Daffodil's up. Catching his breath, Richie let Lauren pull him to the old chalkboard they'd wheeled in at the beginning of the summer. It was divided into columns, each one with an animal name at the top. Lion and ostrich were circled. Richie felt Lauren's hand on his arm, and thoughts of the chase melted away. It was probably just a win anyway, he thought. Lauren had lion as usual. Richie said, and Fritz is going with ostrich. What are you thinking, Daffodil? Daffodil was gazing over the tree line at the wispy moon just starting to materialize as the sky tinted purple. Tonight, she whispered, I choose the mighty wolf. Lauren circled wolf and Richie's pick zebra. She remained at the chalkboard, chalk at the ready, and the other three plopped into weather-worn beaten chairs around the rusty chimenea they'd gotten from Fritz's grandpa. Then they settled into silence and the game began. What was the game? Just listen for the animals. Every time they heard a roar or a rummage or a growl far off in the distance, Lauren would put a check in that animal's column. If your pick had the most checks by the end of the night, you won. Most nights the board was filled. But tonight, for whatever reason, the animals were silent. After 20 dull minutes, Lauren hadn't added a single check. Let's just do the s'mores, Fritz shouted. In agreement, they all reached for their assigned ingredient. Lauren revealed the bag of marshmallows, Daffodil the graham crackers, Fritz the chocolate. Richie reached in his pocket for the lighter. The lighter. Where was the lighter? Richie was sure he'd stuffed it in his back pocket before he left. It was the one his dad used for the grill with the long snout, plastic trigger, and yellow handle. But no matter how hard he patted his pockets, it wasn't there. You forgot the fire starter, Fritz accused. This was their last night in the woods before school started, and thanks to Richie, it was now officially the lamest one of the summer. Part 3 of 5, Newcomer. Only noise came from the crickets chirping in the trees. Far in the distance, the safari animals remained silent. Lauren sat on the ground, leaning against the chalkboard. Fritz twirled the leaf in his fingers. Daffodil sat in a meditation pose, gazing at the moon. Richie was looking just over the tree line at the roller coaster's peak about 100 yards away. Did you guys ever go to Presto's Playland? Richie asked. Of course we went to Presto's Playland, Richard, Fritz replied. It was only one of the most popular amusement parks in the county. You still have a lot to learn about this town, don't you? Really, Fritz? Lauren said. You went to Presto's Playland? Did you take a time machine? Because it closed 10 years before you were born. My parents told me about it, Fritz said, refocusing on his leaf. If it was so popular, why did it close? Richie asked. Richie swore he saw a flicker of a glance pass between Lauren and Fritz. Lauren was about to respond, but she was interrupted by a sound behind the chalkboard. Shaking branches. Suddenly alert, they all shifted cautiously toward the noise. The shaking grew louder, and the branches started to bob up and down. A burst of leaves, and then, perched on top of the chalkboard, a chimpanzee, smiling ear to ear. The humans shuffled backwards. After a minute of silent shock, Fritz finally spoke. I know this chimp. We've seen him before. Lauren brushed off Fritz's comment. There were no chimpanzees at Wildlife Adventure. In all of their nights here, had they ever heard a chimp? Fritz insisted he knew this one in particular, but he fell silent when the chimp pulled something from behind its back. Still grinning, it revealed a lighter, one with a long snout, plastic trigger, and yellow handle. If you want to find out what happens next, you're going to have to pick up a copy of The Fire Starter by Chris Slavin, and you can do that by clicking the link in the video description box. I've got everything you need to check out this amazing resource down there. Lots of free materials, great resources for teachers, and fun, engaging stories for students. But now, let's go chat with the creator, Chris Slavin, about his series, Classroom Serial. All right, readers, we are so excited to have the creator of Classroom Serial here today, Chris Slavin. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, we're going to just dig right into our 5 questions. And my first one is, how do you come up with your ideas for Classroom Serial? And a little bit even deeper than that is like, there's a lot of Classroom Serial. There are a lot of stories. Like, how do you keep coming up with ideas?
Yeah. So the very first classroom serial story I ever read for the grammar series was called Watergate. And that was just one specific idea I had. When I was teaching, I, I guess I just noticed like one thing with my students was like some controversy about like being able to go to the water fountain.
Mm.
And I just had this idea. I love history and like Watergate, like with Nixon in the 70s. I had this idea of like combining the two, that like there would be this investigation about a student wanting to get to the bottom of like the injustice that he faced not being able to go to the water fountain. So I had that idea for just that one story. And I needed characters to make that story happen. So I came up with a few characters. And then for the original grammar series, it just built off that. So I had a place, a school, Fairview Middle School, and I had some characters. And then the next story, I just came up with another situation for them to be in. So that was for the grammar, and then for the reading comprehension, the story that you just read, the idea is actually a lot more specific. So when I was writing the reading comprehension stuff this past summer, I knew I needed like a new storyline, and new characters and everything. And I thought back, I when I was in high school, well, actually, so first I'll tell you that. So where I'm from in New Jersey, I'm from a town called Toms River, and really close to us is an amusement park. It's called Six Flags Great Adventure, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like a really popular amusement park when I was a kid. It still is. But anyway, when I was in high school, I had an art teacher my sophomore year who was a little bit older than us. And we knew she was pretty young. But I remember when she told us the story that when she was in high school, she was from the town that Six Flags Great Adventure was in, a town called Jackson. And I remember her telling us the story once that when she was in high school, she and her friends had this like secret spot in the woods, and this like routine that they would do like every weekend where they would go to this spot in the woods and they would just sit quietly and they would listen for the animals of the nearby. There was like a safari that was part of Six Flags. And I just thought that was so cool. And that just stuck with me like forever. I
Mm-hmm.
just thought, like, how cool is that? I love stories like that. I love like thinking about the history of specific places, like what happened here, like what
Mm-hmm.
stories does this specific place have to tell? Like what was this place like 30 years ago, 40 years ago? So that just always stuck with me, and I thought like what a cool way to start a story. Like this group of friends, they have this secret spot in the woods and they listen for the animals, and that is exactly what happens in the fire starter. So yeah, and then I think that's just it. Like once you have that idea for just one story, you have characters, you have a setting, you have a place, it's so much easier to kind of build from there, and come up with adventures for those people to be in.
Yeah, and I like how you said they all kind of have a little bit of a seed in reality. Like it's something that you've heard about or you've seen or you witnessed from your students or other people. So stories are all around us. We just have to pay attention. So one thing that you and I both have in common is that we were teachers before we were creators. And so I'm a little bit curious about that. As a kid, what was your favorite part about school?
Yeah, I think it's probably what most kids would even say now. Like just being with my friends, laughing, having fun in school with my friends. I was a good student, but still, like the best part of school for me was definitely like being around my friends. I knew that from like early age, I had really great teachers, and I knew that like writing was something that maybe I was good at, more relatively good at, more than average. But I wouldn't say like in school I really loved writing. I just knew vaguely that it was something like that I was pretty good at. And then through high school that continued, and I knew I was pretty good at like writing essays, relative to it. But I never really like loved writing. I will say one thing that I do remember really specifically about middle school in particular, which is what I taught. When I was in seventh grade, I had a teacher who was really big on diagramming sentences, grammar, learning infinitives, and like all like these specific like grammar rules. And I knew even at the time, like this was kind of different. Like I hadn't done this in English classes before. But yeah, the teacher, Mrs. Moore, I remember it was like a huge part of our class, and I really loved it because I liked English. But one thing that I think English is lacking sometimes is like hard, concrete, like the right answer or like,
Mm-hmm.
like content like that. But grammar offered that. And it was like to diagram a sentence, this was the subject, this was the verb. And I remember like kind of latching onto that and really liking it. And I guess it that helped
It stuck.
influence like my it stuck, yeah, because all these years later, like when I created Classroom Serial, that was like at the heart of it, like the grammar, the right or wrong, kind of like objective like truths to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say those were some things that stuck out to me from when I was a student.
Yeah, so much about being better as a writer is very vague, right? And so this is something very concrete that people can work to improve on. Okay, so flipping the coin, what was your favorite thing about school as a teacher?
Yeah, so I taught for 9 years. I taught middle school outside of Baltimore, and I loved so much about being a teacher. I miss now, like just like the school community. Like I just loved schools. Like they were always a place for me that were like safe and fun and I miss being part of that like school community and my colleagues being with other teachers and kind of like working together. I miss that part. But I would say the thing about like content wise, like teaching that I loved most was stories, novels, reading books with my kids. I taught ELA and reading was a separate thing. But like anytime we were in on a story together. So when I was teaching ELA, the very first book I ever taught was called The K by
Oh
Theodore
yeah.
Taylor. We read Esperanza Rising in sixth grade, Gary Paulson, Hatchet, My Life in Dog Years, The Lightning Thief, Holes. Like anytime we were like in on a story together, was I just loved it so much. And that too influenced classroom serial. Like everything is a story. So yeah, just the power of stories were so important to me when I was a teacher for sure.
Yeah, it's probably not hard to realize that my favorite part about teaching was read aloud. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I see that. I can see that.
yeah, makes sense, right? Um, what tips do you have for writers who are interested in writing stories that continue the way that yours do? Are there things that you do to keep track of your character details so they don't like accidentally shift like eye color or, a backpack they always wear? Like, what tips and tricks do you have for making sure that you can carry all those things through from episode to episode?
Yeah. So I think the first the first part of the question, like writing stories that continue, like my best advice would just be like just start with one. And just like I did, like with classroom serial, I had that idea of just Watergate. And then for the reading comprehension, I just had the idea for the fire starter. If you just start with just that one story, it'll naturally build. Like you'll just start to think of different ideas for your characters and your setting. And even before you have a story, even if you just have a character, just an idea of somebody in your head, or even if you don't have that, just the idea of a place, like some story is going to be happening here. Just starting with that one thing is going to be so key because you don't have to have the entire thing in mind. You don't have to have the whole plot, figured out, or like what's this character's arc going to be. I don't. When I start the classroom serial stories, and I would imagine that a lot of writers. I always try to think about like TV, because I love watching some TV shows. So there's some really great TV out there. They don't know the whole arc of the whole series when they get started. They just start with one, and naturally, like the ideas kind of come to you with that. So I would say just get started. But the other part of the question about like keeping track of the characters, yeah, definitely. I like have a notebook of, like little character details that I want to keep consistent. Remembering like little things about a character, like their family and like how their relationships with
Yeah.
their family and like their interests and things. Writing it down is really helpful. For me, I'd say the big thing that I always find that I need to figure out is like ages, because in a lot of
Mm.
the classroom serial stories, sometimes we do some time traveling and we're hopping around and we're meeting characters when they're older and when they're younger. So I like the math is really important to me. Like how old would they have been in
Yeah.
1997? What year were they born? Like those little character details are really important to me. So I find myself doing a little bit of math sometimes. With like what year, what month were characters born. But yeah, writing it down is really important. I have a little notebook. And I feel like as the world kind of like grows, I'll probably need something a little bit more, like bigger, like a whiteboard or something.
Or like a Google Doc that like can't accidentally be erased or go through the washing machine, maybe.
That's a
That
good one too. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a
Yeah,
good
it
idea.
stresses me out a little bit. Like what if you lose the notebook? Like, I mean, I'm a handwriter too, but
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, you're right. The Google Doc, yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, I'll have to get one of those going, I think.
Yeah. All right, my last question for you is if this today is their first experience with classroom cereals, they've never heard about it before, what do you want them to know about it and what it can offer their classroom and their students?
Yeah. So classroom serial, the sort of like brief way to put it is it's activities for your classroom, your middle school classroom that are also stories. So right now we have three main camps of that. There's the original, the grammar stories, which is a series of stories that double as grammar exercises, like editing exercises. There's a reader's theater series called Serial Theater. And there's the new reading comprehension series, which you just read the first story of. All of them, all the stories build one after the other. But at the same time, there are going to be activities that, like, just for the sake of themselves, will work in your class. So for the grammar ones, like I said, it's an editing exercise. But I think really the big power of it is that it is a series of stories. Like I mentioned when I was teaching, like that's the most powerful thing I think for me is that to be in on a story together as a class, characters, the setting, wanting to know what happens next. There are a lot of cliffhangers. That's sort of like the what makes classroom serial kind of unique, that it's these series of stories. So you can find everything on classroom serial with a C, classroomserial.com. And well, as I'm adding more and more stuff all the time. So the original 30 grammar stories are totally free as PDFs. And then a lot more comes with the Classroom Serial subscription, which is just $30 a year. And with that, you get everything, the serial theater, reader's theater that I mentioned, all of the reading comprehension series, and a whole lot more. So yeah, you can find everything on classroomserial.com.
Awesome. I will be sure to put the link for that down in the video description box. And as somebody who grew up in the whole language era, the idea of like not just having drill and kill or phonics or like, like the minutia that we can do, we can enjoy a story and we can learn. That is just so appealing. So I love that you have created this, and I'm so grateful for your time today and for letting us learn a little bit more about you in Classroom Serial. Readers, everything you need is down there in the description box, and we will see you again for another First Chapter Friday next week. Happy reading.
Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. I'm a big fan of First Chapter Friday, and it was a pleasure to be here. So thank you so much for having me on.
Before you go, please like this video and subscribe. I hope I'll see you here again for more First Chapter Fridays, brain breaks, teaching tips, and other great content. Happy reading!